Welcome to Dyslexia Information Night, March 2022. So in case you missed the face-to-face information night, we went ahead and made a screencast so that you can have access to the same exact information. So with that, welcome. Literacy learning is a collaborative community responsibility. It is achieved through partnerships among educators, caregivers, learners, and the community in prioritizing education. Partnerships can serve to strengthen, support, and even transform individuals, resulting in improved program quality, more efficient use of resources, and better alignment of goals and curricula. And that's through the Harvard Family Research Project 2010. So goal 6 in our comprehensive literacy plan is all about partnerships. And so we just want to acknowledge that we understand our partnerships are critical and important. And just as indicated above, through these partnerships, we can prioritize education. And again, that's our comprehensive literacy goal number 6. So with that, we'll get started. We have 3 literacy coaches in Edina: Patty Thomas, Carrie Duncan, and myself, Sandra Harley. Leanne Feely is our MTS coordinator. MTS stands for Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. She is also our Student Support Services liaison. And so our agenda for today is as follows. And I just want to preface this by saying that we've been enthusiastic about tapping into experts, looking closely at recent research, connecting with MDE, and attending workshops specific to dyslexia to bring this information to you. We have also partnered with our Parent Alliance, Dyslexia Alliance support group. They also helped us to develop the insights to this, to the content of this slide deck. So a special thanks to them for offering that time and supporting our work. Our agenda, first off, is what is dyslexia? So we will be looking at the definition of dyslexia, and many of you probably already know what that is. And so thank you for being patient. Number 2, we'll be debunking some myths about dyslexia. Number 3, we will be looking at some indicators or symptoms, if you will, of dyslexia. Number 4, we'll get into a little bit of Edina's MTSS, or Systems of Support. And then how can the literacy coach support teachers? We'll talk a little bit about that. And then also some resources for you as families. So take a minute and look at this slide. Many times, folks talk about dyslexia from a deficit standpoint, but many people lean on their strengths to learn and grow into places of success. In case you don't have any friends that you know that have dyslexia, you might recognize some names from this list of well-known people. You might connect with some of the stories of these folks and what it took to get to where they are today. So as we talk about our learners, we want to empower our students and support their needs in our classrooms. Here is the dyslexia definition that lives on the International Dyslexia Association website, in addition to the MDE website. And I'm just going to read it to you. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. Neurological meaning it's the makeup of the brain. It isn't a result of an injury or visual problems. It's the makeup of the brain prior to any formal instruction. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent recognition of words and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relationship to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So I just want to pick this apart just a little bit. When we talk about the expected in relation to other cognitive abilities. Basically, what that's saying is a student could be highly intellectual and still have dyslexia, right? Because again, it's in the phonological component of language, right? It does not impact intelligence in any way. And then looking at this bottom piece where it says, and the provision of effective classroom instruction, basically what that's saying is this student with dyslexia or markers of dyslexia, maybe they're not learning like the next person is in that tier 1 instruction. So in the regular ed classroom, whereas a typical student or a typical reader might be learning, the dyslexic student might be struggling a little bit. I want to go back to this bottom part real quick here where it talks about secondary consequences. So really what this means is, there's consequences for students not being able to decode accurately. Their reading is labored, it impacts fluency, and then ultimately comprehension. And so when it says may include problems in reading comprehension, that's exactly what they're referencing, is the students putting all their efforts into the decoding piece. And that's just eliminating their capacity to comprehend at the same time. Reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And so really all this is saying is that a student who spends a lot of time reading is expanding their vocabulary and background knowledge. But if a student's maybe not reading very often, then their growth of vocabulary and background knowledge is impeded. Reading and the brain. So this is a quote from Sally Shaywitz. Within the brain, a child is literally building the neurocircuitry that links the sounds of spoken words to the print code that represent those sounds. And so what you see here is the brain of a dyslexic reader and then that of a neurotypical reader. And I think the big takeaway here is that the dyslexic reader is primarily using the front part of the brain only, whereas the efficient reader is using both the front and the back of the brain simultaneously. Okay, so there's neurocircuitry that connects the front to the back of the brain, and research reveals that after 100 hours of instruction, that a student can build that neurocircuitry, and they've been able to see this on functional MRI scans where students are building that circuitry to the back of the brain. Whereas the front of the brain is really just the awareness of sounds, right? But the back of the brain is where students connect those sounds to the letters or the phonemes to the graphemes. And then that second piece is automaticity. So we really want to get our dyslexic readers to a place where they are building that neurocircuitry to the back of the brain, right? Because it's so critical in the reading process. Okay, so debunking some myths about dyslexia. Myth number 1, dyslexia is acquired, not inherited. The fact is it runs in families. The second myth, people with dyslexia see words backwards and letters reversed. The fact is letter reversals and confusions are typical of beginning readers and spellers. Another myth, reading ability is related to intelligence. People who don't read well can't be very smart. Well, we know just from reading that definition that this isn't the phonological component of language, right? It's a phonological weakness. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Very intelligent people can have dyslexia. Myth number 4, people with dyslexia cannot read. Well, that is absolutely not true. Most individuals with dyslexia can read with varying levels of proficiency, right? So we know that dyslexic, there's a lot of symptoms for dyslexia, a lot of indicators, more than what we've even shared on the slide deck. There's a plethora of them. And so for every indicator, there's also a range from mild to profound. And so students can fall anywhere within that range. So there's really no two individuals with dyslexia that share the same symptoms or the same ranges, right? It varies a lot, and it makes it hard to pinpoint dyslexia too, right? Dyslexia can be outgrown. Absolutely a myth. Dyslexia is lifelong, but with educational intervention, individuals can be very successful. Dyslexia is rare. It is estimated that 1 in 5 students have dyslexia. Right? So that's 20% of the population, and we acknowledge as educators that our students, the dyslexia is impacting a large percentage of our student population. Early indicators. Okay, and so these are just some of the early indicators, not all of them, but we just kind of wanted to point out some of them. Late learning to talk or slow to learn new words. Trouble producing speech sounds and pronouncing words. For example, aminal instead of animal. Difficulty with word order, mon lower instead of lawn mower. Avoids letters or confuses them. May not want to look at books, but only be read to. Can't recall sounds of letters. May have fine motor skills that develop more slowly than other children. So I just want to go back to this right here where it says they may not want to look at books, but only be read to. A student's ability to comprehend when they're being read to can be really high, right? But they might not want to read the books because they're struggling with the decoding piece. So it's just really something important to recognize. And last, I'd like to point out that if you have a child at home that's late learning to talk, that doesn't mean they have dyslexia, right? So we want to take that into account, that there's a lot of symptoms, and we want to look at the patterns of symptoms, and we want to look at all the symptoms across the board and kind of do some comparing. And we know that we can't diagnose for dyslexia, right? And so just want to caution you not to, if you have a child that's late learning to talk, that means they have dyslexia, because that's not at all what that means. So moving on. K through 5 indicators. Slower to learn phonics, which is the connection between letters and sounds. Lacks the ability to sound out new words. Confusion of small words. So looking at all these little functional words like was and saw, on, no, to, and do, I've seen and, all of those little words, I've noticed students with markers of dyslexia that have diagnoses of dyslexia actually will skip over those words, or they'll read them incorrectly. Reading ability is below grade level. Oral or silent reading comprehension struggles, right? Again, we know that if a child's spending all their time decoding, that they're going to struggle with that end goal of comprehension. Slow and labored reading. Difficulty conveying ideas effectively in writing. Inconsistent spelling. Dyslexia diagnosis considerations. A child may not qualify for special education, but still meet criteria for a diagnosis of dyslexia. Schools do not make a DSM/V diagnosis of dyslexia, nor do schools determine that a student does not have dyslexia. Very, very important, right? We can't diagnose, nor can we say, oh, your student doesn't have, or your child doesn't have dyslexia. Absolutely not. However, per MDE, schools can identify characteristics of dyslexia through various screening tools and various assessments of different kinds. Regardless of the diagnosis, schools can effectively address the needs of students through explicit, systematic, and evidence-based instruction through a continuum of supports or multi-tiered systems of support. And so looking at this visual, this is a visual of our multi-tiered systems of supports for struggling students. And if you look at the very bottom in green, this is our tier 1 core support. This is the support that students are getting in the classroom, that all students are getting in the classroom, right? This is their main meal, if you will. And I love using that terminology because it makes sense to me, right? Everybody needs their main meal. And so looking at bullet number 1, classroom teachers use collaborative classroom resources at each grade level with all learners. Universal screeners are used to identify students not meeting grade level expectations in reading. And all students receive explicit, sequential, and systematic classroom instruction, and teachers are actively monitoring student performance. Then we have our Tier 2. This impacts some students. It's a supplemental piece. Students not making adequate progress in Tier 1 are provided a more intensive intervention at their instructional level in addition to Tier 1 instruction and supports. We never want to not give all of our students Tier 1 supports. Every student has to have that main meal. Reading interventionists progress monitor student progress. Okay, so you saw progress monitoring at Tier 1, progress monitoring at Tier 2, and you're also going to see progress monitoring at Tier 3. Tier 3 impacts some students. It's intensive and it's individualized. If students are not making adequate progress with Tier 1 and Tier 2 instruction and support, a more intensive and individualized intervention is prescribed. Again, progress monitoring, right? Progress monitoring is so important. We want to know that what we're doing for students is working, because if it's not, we have to change it. Research-based resources used within all tiers. Our research-based resources are explicit, they are systematic and sequential. Screening measures to identify students that may exhibit characteristics of dyslexia, and then progress monitoring at all tiers to monitor for growth. And we want to know, again, if something isn't working so that we can change it. I'm going to make this larger so that you can see it. Supporting students with dyslexia. So this is the flow chart that Edina uses. And if we're looking at the very top where it says universal screening, it all starts there, right? We do initial screenings, and in some cases, children already have that outside dyslexia diagnosis. And students fall into one of two categories. They either fall into the category of scoring below the 40th percentile, or they fall into the category on the left-hand side above the 40th percentile. So looking closely at the right side, student scores are below the 40th percentile mark and require more instruction that is explicit. An intervention plan is advised. After that's done, then the student receives extra instruction from an interventionist in addition to the regular classroom teacher. And then one of two things happen. Either there's no progress, right, and a referral to the student support team is made, or the student makes progress and maybe now they're performing at above the 30th or 40th percentile, and their intervention is stopped and they go back into the classroom. If a student isn't making progress, one of two things happens. There's either a referral made, right, or there's data that's analyzed and reviewed and the change is made to the intervention, right? That's our progress monitoring piece. If there's a change that's made to the intervention, we start back up toward the top where the students start receiving instruction using a new intervention, right, in addition to the regular classroom curriculum. So looking at the left side of the flow chart, if a student does not meet the threshold of service, scores are below the 40th percentile mark, student will continue with regular classroom instruction. And so when the student, for example, maybe the student is performing above the 40th percentile and they are doing great. They have an outside dyslexia diagnosis and they're doing great in the classroom with just that Tier 1 core instruction. But we might have some students that need a little extra. We might have students that need 20 minutes of some fluency building activities to support automaticity. And we might have students that need more than that. Okay. This is where literacy coaches can come into play and support teachers and team with teachers. And this is happening in pockets across the elementary school. So we are able to work in pockets with teachers. And we are supporting, we are teaming with them, we are delivering assessments of various forms. We're analyzing the data together to pinpoint student need. We are providing resources for the teachers, and in all cases, they are research-based, explicit, and systematic. And then we are progress monitoring, because again, we want to know if what we're doing is working. And then if we need to change the intervention, then we're moving forward and changing it. And so this has been an opportunity for literacy coaches to really dig in and support teachers. I'm going back to my slide deck. Okay. How can a literacy coach support teachers? Well, we talked about this a little bit. Edina is providing and funding training, a lot of training for literacy coaches. We are in a letters training cohort with some certified teachers. There's 25 or 27 of us. We are also in a course that's really close to ending, actually, titled Elementary Reading Academy, and that is through CORE, which is the Consortium on Reaching Excellence. We have also been attending dyslexia workshops, and all of this new knowledge, and again, we're still learning, but this new knowledge is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It has been so valuable in that it's building capacity for our literacy coaching team, and in retrospect, building capacity with our teachers. And so with this new knowledge, we were able to provide professional development across elementary schools at every site on the basics of dyslexia. We delivered this PD at the high school level and then also at the pre-K level. In addition, there's an online course in Schoology that teachers can either take if they weren't able to make the face-to-face sessions, or maybe they just want to revisit the information, right? So that's there in Schoology. And again, I was speaking to these pieces a little bit on the last slide. We are delivering assessments of various types. We are supporting and teaming with teachers on the data and looking closely at it in order to understand the needs of our students or student. And then we are providing some supports and then following up with progress monitoring. I am very excited to share that we are partnering with Community Ed to offer, for the first time ever, at least since I've been in Edina, some specialized reading tutoring this summer. And session 1 begins on June 13th, and it goes till July 15th. The week of 4th of July, there will be no tutoring. Okay, and so it's 4 weeks, 4 hours each week. That's a total of 16 hours. And then session 2 begins on July 18th and goes till August 12th. And that's 4 weeks, again, 4 hours each week, another 16 hours. And the parents can sign up for one session. They can sign up for both sessions. The nice thing about this is that our tutors are uniquely skilled in Orton Gillingham. And for those of you that don't know what Orton Gillingham is not a reading program or a reading resource. It is an approach. So it's an approach that is embedded into many reading programs or reading resources. And the approach is very direct and explicit instruction. It is systematic in that the skills progress from easier to more difficult. And there's a lot of multisensory pieces embedded into it and a lot of drills of various sorts. And so that's the Orton Gillingham approach. And again, it's built into many different resources. And so the resource that we will be using for this specialized reading tutoring is research-based, and it does have that Orton Gillingham approach embedded in it. What's also nice is this resource is customized to your child's reading needs. So on day 1, in the very first tutoring session, they'll be administered a placement assessment. And that placement assessment is going to determine where the student starts or where your child begins the program. Scheduling directly with the tutor, this offers a lot of flexibility for both families and tutors. What this means really is that the tutor and the family can set up tutoring sessions that work for both of your schedules, right? So that just, like I said, provides some flexibility. There are scholarships available. And the details of all of this are in the Summer 2022 Community Ed Catalog on page 55. We did have to establish a deadline, which is May 16th, because we need some time to align tutors with families. So the deadline to register will be May 16th. Resources. I reached out to Dr. Heather Kenny, and Dr. Heather Kenny is both the president and founder of Unleashed Innovations. And I asked her, I said, so if I'm a parent, what are some strategies, or how can I support my child with the reading process at home? And these are some of her suggestions. She said, make it a fun and relaxing environment. If your child gets stuck on a word, just give it to them, she says. Because they have sometimes, in some cases, right, a difficult, stressful time at school. Right? They may struggle with decoding at school and feel stressed out over it. So when they're at home, you want to just make it fun. You want to make it relaxing. So if they get stuck on the word or a word, just give it to them. Or she says, let your child be the guide, meaning if they are embedding some multisensory pieces, for example, maybe they're tapping those words out on their fingers or their arms, right? Let them be the guide, right? Those are strategies they're learning in class that are supporting their learning. So that's a good thing. Having some decodable books on hand. And decodable books are books that align with explicit and systematic phonics instruction. They are phonetically decodable. They're contrived to help students practice specific letter sound patterns. Engaging phonics games, phonemic awareness games. Read to your child, and last, believe in your child. So I thought that was all really valuable information. And if I'm a parent, that's gonna help me support my child. Okay, I'm gonna click on this handout so that you can see it. And this is something we passed out during the Dyslexia Night. And I obviously can't pass it out to you, but if you need some of these handouts, you can reach out to one of these contacts at the bottom of this document. We will get you what you need. But on here is some resources, and I just want to point out Learning Alley really quickly. Learning Alley is an audio book, okay? So there are no pages, right? There are no pictures. There's no book. It's just an audio piece that supports a book that your child might get at the library. It works great for students to follow along with the books that they get from the library. It supports inquiry. It supports a love of reading. Students can follow along with interesting books that they may not have been able to decode otherwise, right? But they can understand and comprehend them. And so all you need to do is to connect with your child's teacher, and they will reach out to the school media specialist, who will then generate login information for your child. Super simple. Number 2, high noon sound out or decodable books, right? We know that decodable books are valuable in that they allow students to practice, right, those patterns that they're learning in class. And then Flyleaf. These are additional decodable books along with simple words. Decodable chapter books. And so those are some just options if you want to go online and look at some of those pieces. Sounderandfriends.com is phonemic awareness. They are phonemic awareness activities that your child can engage in. I got this resource from Heather Kenny as well in our last dyslexia workshop. She said this was really great for kids that want to practice phonemic awareness activities. And then last but not least is number 6, and it's titled the Edina Public Schools Dyslexia Guide. We put a lot of work into this last year. There's a plethora of information, and it was published on the Edina website this year. And it's in 2 different places on the website. Super, super valuable information. You can also hover over the second QR code, and it will pull the dyslexia guide up automatically. We also have parking lot questions. If you have a question, you can go ahead and hover over this QR code. And then last but not least is the Dyslexia Parent Alliance Edina Facebook group, a huge support system for you. And again, you can hover over this and see what that's all about. And then last are some contacts. In Edina, if you have questions, you can reach out to one of these people. Jody D. St. Hubert is our Director of Teaching and Learning, and that's her contact information. Bethany Van Osdell is our Assistant Director of Teaching and Learning, and that is her information. And then Kate Strand, Early Childhood Special Ed Teacher. If you have questions about screening, pre-K, things like that, she would be your person. Okay, we also have this handout in Spanish. So if you need one of those, please reach out. And now I'm going to go back to share this tab instead. Okay. All right. Last slide. Dyslexia is not due to either lack of intelligence or desire to learn. With appropriate teaching methods, students with dyslexia can learn successfully. This is a quote through the International Dyslexia Association. So I just want to share one last thing. As we collectively become more knowledgeable and we're still learning, we understand that dyslexia is common and impacting a large percentage of our student population, and we acknowledge that we need to identify with and nurture a student's strengths and remediate the phonological weakness. And as educators, we truly are lifelong learners. And so with that, thank you. And again, please reach out if you have any questions.